I never thought my life would turn into the kind of story you only see in dramatic movies or read about in shocking online confessions. My name is Sarah, and I'm about to share something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and myself. It started on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was in our kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner when my husband Mark came home. He had this look on his face, a mix of excitement and something else I couldn't quite place. He kissed my cheek, his usual greeting, but today it felt different, almost rehearsed. "Hey, beautiful," he said, leaning against the counter. "I've got something to tell you." I smiled, putting down my knife. "Good news, I hope?" "The best," he replied, his eyes shining with that entrepreneurial sparkle I'd fallen in love with years ago. "Remember that business idea I've been working on? The investment group is interested, very interested." My heart swelled with pride. Mark had been developing this tech startup for over a year, pouring our savings into it, working late nights and weekends. This could be our breakthrough. "That's amazing," I exclaimed, hugging him tightly. "When do you meet with them?" "Actually, that's the thing," he said, pulling back slightly. "They want to meet us, together. This Friday night." I frowned. "Friday night? Can't they meet during business hours?" Mark's smile tightened just a fraction. "They're international investors, flying in just for this. They want to make it a more casual setting. Dinner and drinks at our place." I nodded slowly. "Okay, I can make that work." "How many people are we talking about?" "Just 3 partners," he said, already turning toward the living room. "Alex, Ryan, and Ben. They're all coming here." That's when the first alarm bell went off in my mind. Not a loud one, just a subtle ding that something was off. Why would 3 investors want to have a business meeting at our home on a Friday night? And why did Mark seem nervous when he mentioned their names? "Should I book a restaurant instead?" I suggested. "It might be more professional." "No," Mark said quickly, too quickly. "They specifically wanted to come here. Something about seeing the environment of the people they're investing in." I let it go, convincing myself I was overthinking things. Mark had always been the business-savvy one in our relationship. If he said this was how it needed to be done, then I should trust him. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Mark was unusually specific about how I should dress, what I should serve, even how I should style my hair. I found it odd, but chalked it up to him wanting everything perfect for these important investors. "They're quite traditional," he explained when I questioned why he wanted me in a dress, rather than my usual business casual attire. "Old money type. They appreciate certain aesthetics." Friday evening arrived, and I was putting the finishing touches on my makeup when Mark knocked on our bedroom door. "Almost ready?" he asked, peeking in. "Just give me 5 minutes," I replied, applying one last coat of mascara. When I came out, Mark's eyes widened appreciatively. "You look stunning. They're going to be very impressed." I smoothed down my navy blue dress. "You think this is appropriate? It's a bit more formal than I usually wear for a casual dinner." "It's perfect," he insisted, taking my hand. "Just remember to be charming, but not too forward. Let them lead the conversation." The doorbell rang at exactly 7 p.m. Mark squeezed my hand. "Showtime." I opened the door to find 3 men standing on our porch, each holding an expensive-looking bottle of wine. They were all dressed impeccably in tailored suits, looking more like they were heading to a board meeting than a casual dinner. "Sarah, this is Alex, Ryan, and Ben," Mark said, making introductions. Alex, the tallest of the 3, stepped forward first. His handshake was firm, his eyes assessing me in a way that made me slightly uncomfortable. "A pleasure to finally meet you, Sarah. Mark has told us so much about you. Only good things, I hope," I replied with a polite smile. Ryan was next, with a boyish face that contrasted with his expensive suit. "Mark understated how beautiful you are." I felt my cheeks flush at the direct compliment. "Thank you. Please, come in." Ben was the quietest of the 3, merely nodding as he entered, his eyes scanning our home with what seemed like professional curiosity. As I took their coats and Mark poured drinks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. These men didn't talk like investors. Their questions about Mark's business were vague, but their questions about me were oddly specific. "How long have you and Mark been married?" Alex asked, sitting a little too close to me on the couch. 5 years, I replied, shifting slightly away. Any children? Ryan inquired from across the room. Not yet, I said. We've been focusing on Mark's business. Ben, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. And what is it that you do, Sarah? I'm a graphic designer, I explained. I work from home mostly. The three men exchanged glances that I couldn't quite interpret. Mark seemed nervous, drinking more than usual and jumping into conversations whenever they strayed too close to topics he seemed uncomfortable with. Dinner was equally strange. The men barely touched the food I'd prepared, instead focusing on drinking and asking increasingly personal questions. I was starting to feel like I was on display rather than hosting potential business partners. So, Sarah, Alex said, setting down his wine glass, Mark tells us you're quite adventurous. I frowned, confused. I'm not sure what you mean. Mark jumped in. What Alex means is that you're open-minded, willing to try new things. The men laughed and I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I suppose I'm open to reasonable experiences, I said carefully. Ryan leaned forward. And what would you consider unreasonable? Before I could answer, Mark stood up abruptly. Why don't we move to the living room? More comfortable. I followed, feeling increasingly uneasy. Something was very wrong here. These weren't business investors. I didn't know what they were, but the professional pretense was wearing thin. Once we were all seated in the living room, Alex turned to me directly. Sarah, let's be honest with each other. We're not really here to discuss a business investment. I looked at Mark, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I don't understand. We're here because Mark made us an interesting proposition, Ben said, speaking for the first time in a while. One that involves you. My heart started pounding. What kind of proposition? Mark finally looked at me, his expression pleading. Sarah, remember how we talked about needing this investment? How it would secure our future? I nodded slowly, dreading where this was going. Well, there's a condition, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Something they want in return for their investment. I stood up. I think you should leave, I said to the three men. Alex remained seated, completely unfazed. Sarah, we're willing to invest $500,000 in your husband's company. That's more than enough to get it off the ground and make you both very wealthy. I shook my head. I don't care what you're offering. This is inappropriate. Ryan laughed. Inappropriate? Honey, you have no idea what we're suggesting yet. Mark grabbed my arm. Sarah, please, just hear them out. This is our future we're talking about. I pulled away from him. Our future doesn't involve selling ourselves to strangers. That's not what this is, Mark insisted, his voice desperate. Not really. Then what is it? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and fear. The three men looked at each other and Alex nodded. Very well, since Mark seems incapable of explaining, let me be direct. We're willing to make this investment in exchange for one night with you. The room went silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at Mark, expecting him to be as horrified as I was, but he just stood there looking guilty. You can't be serious, I finally managed to say. Oh, we're very serious, Ben replied calmly. And before you refuse, consider what we're offering. Financial security for the rest of your life. No more worrying about bills, no more struggling to build a business from scratch. I felt sick to my stomach. You want me to sleep with you for money? That's prostitution. No, Mark said quickly. It's not like that. It's just one night. And then we have the investment. We can start our life properly. I stared at him in disbelief. You're asking me to prostitute myself to three men, and you don't think that's what it is? It's different, he insisted. We're married. We're a team. This is something we're doing together for our future. Nothing about this is together, I shot back. You're asking me to sacrifice my body, my dignity, while you get what you want. Alex stood up and approached me slowly. Sarah, we're not monsters. We're not asking you to do anything against your will. This is a choice. A business transaction, if you will. A business transaction? I repeated incredulously. You want to buy access to my body, and you're calling it a business transaction? Ryan chimed in. Look at it this way. People make sacrifices all the time for their future. Some work jobs they hate for years. Others move away from family. You're being asked to make a one-time sacrifice for a lifetime of security. I shook my head, backing away. This is insane. I want you all to leave, now. Mark stepped in front of me. Sarah, please, just think about it. $500,000. Think about what we could do with that. The house we could buy, the travels, the early retirement. Or think about how I'd have to live with myself afterward, I retorted. How could I ever look at you again? How could you look at me? That's the thing, Ben said quietly. After tonight, it's over. We go our separate ways, the money is transferred, and you never have to see us again. I looked from one man to another, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. This was the kind of scenario that happened in movies, not to real people, not to me. Let me make something clear, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I am not for sale. My body is not for sale. Our marriage is not for sale. Mark's face fell. Sarah, don't be like that. This is our only chance. Our only chance, I repeated, my voice rising. Our only chance is to pimp me out to your business associates? That's the solution you've come up with? It's not like that, he said weakly. Then what is it like, I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, my husband, the man who promised to love and protect me, is asking me to sleep with 3 strangers for money. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Finally, Alex spoke. Mark, perhaps we should give them a moment to discuss this privately. Mark nodded gratefully. Yes, that might be best. The 3 men stood and walked onto our patio, closing the glass door behind them. The moment they were out of earshot, I turned on Mark. How could you? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. How could you even consider this? Sarah, I'm desperate, he admitted, his own eyes filling with tears. The business is failing. We're going to lose everything if we don't get this investment. So you decided to sell me? I asked incredulously. That was your solution? It's not selling you, he insisted. It's a temporary arrangement for a permanent solution. There's nothing temporary about what you're asking me to do, I said, my voice breaking. The memory of this would last forever. How could you ever respect me again? How could I respect myself? I would respect you more than ever, he claimed, for being willing to sacrifice for us. Sacrifice? I repeated. Mark, soldiers sacrifice. Parents sacrifice. This isn't a sacrifice. This is degradation. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Sarah, just think about it. One night versus a lifetime of financial struggle. It's a simple choice. I stared at him, trying to find the man I'd married in his desperate, pleading eyes. But I couldn't find him. All I saw was a stranger willing to trade my dignity for money. No, I said firmly. The answer is no. And if you insist on this, if you don't tell these men to leave right now, then our marriage is over. Mark's face crumpled. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more, I replied. The man I married would never have asked this of me. The man I married would have protected me from men like them. He sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. I've ruined everything, haven't I? I shook my head. No, Mark, you haven't ruined everything yet. But you're about to if you don't end this right now. He looked up at me, his expression conflicted. But the money is not worth it, I finished for him. Nothing is worth this. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the decision hanging between us. Through the glass door, I could see the 3 men talking amongst themselves, occasionally glancing back into the house. Finally, Mark stood up and walked to the patio door. I held my breath, waiting to see what he would do. He opened the door and stepped outside, closing it behind him. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see the animated discussion. Mark was gesturing wildly, while the 3 men remained calm. Alex seemed to be doing most of the talking, occasionally looking toward me with an unreadable expression. After what felt like an eternity, Mark came back inside, his face grim. They're not willing to accept no for an answer, he said quietly. What does that mean? I asked, a new wave of fear washing over me. They're saying that since they came here in good faith, based on my proposal, they expect something in return. That's blackmail, I said, my voice trembling. They're calling it a misunderstanding, Mark replied. They think I misrepresented your willingness to participate. Because you did, I exclaimed. You never even discussed this with me. I know, he admitted. I don't know what I thought. I was desperate. So what happens now? I asked, my heart pounding. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. They're willing to negotiate. Negotiate what? I demanded. There's nothing to negotiate. They're saying that if you're not comfortable with all 3 of them, perhaps just one, he said quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. You're still trying to bargain with them? After everything I've said, Sarah, what choice do we have? he asked desperately. They're powerful people. They could ruin me professionally. They could make sure I never work in this industry again. And what about me, I shot back. What about what this would do to me? This would be worse for me than for you, he claimed. I'd have to live with the knowledge of what happened. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You'd have to live with the knowledge? You wouldn't be the one whose body was violated. You wouldn't be the one who had to live with that memory. I know, he said weakly, but I'd have to live with knowing I let it happen. Then don't let it happen, I pleaded. Tell them to leave. Face whatever consequences come from that. We'll figure it out together. He shook his head. I can't. I've already invested too much time, too much money. More than your marriage? I asked quietly. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I stood up, my decision made. Fine. If you won't tell them to leave, I will. I walked toward the patio door, but Mark grabbed my arm. No, wait. Let me try one more thing. What could you possibly say that would change anything? I asked, pulling away from him. Just give me 5 minutes, he pleaded. If it doesn't work, I'll tell them to leave. I promise. I hesitated, torn between wanting this to be over and a desperate hope that he might actually do the right thing. 5 minutes, I agreed reluctantly. Then I'm calling the police if they're not gone. Mark nodded and went back outside. This time the conversation was even more heated. I could see Mark's frustration growing as the three men remained calm, almost amused by his distress. Alex seemed to be enjoying this, a small smile playing on his lips as Mark became increasingly agitated. At one point, Mark pointed toward me, and all three men turned to look at me through the glass door. I felt exposed, violated by their gazes, even from a distance. Finally, Mark threw his hands up in defeat and came back inside, his face ashen. They've agreed to a compromise, he said, not looking at me. I don't want to hear about any compromises, I said firmly. This is over. No, you don't understand, he insisted. They've agreed to leave without any involvement from you. But they want something else. What? I asked suspiciously. They want to watch, he said quietly. I stared at him, confused. Watch what? He took a deep breath. Watch us, together. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. You want me to, in front of them? It's better than the alternative, he said quickly. And they said if we do this, they'll still make the investment. $500,000. I shook my head, unable to form words. This was somehow worse than what they'd originally proposed. Not only would I be violated, but it would be in front of an audience, and with my husband as a participant. No, I finally managed to say, absolutely not. Sarah, please, he begged. It's just us. They'll just be watching. It's not like they'd be touching you. It's not about them touching me, I exclaimed. It's about the violation, the degradation, the complete lack of respect for me as a person, as your wife. Think about what this money could do for us, he pleaded. We could buy the house we've always wanted, start a family, travel the world. We could do all that anyway, I retorted. Maybe not as quickly, maybe not as lavishly, but we could do it, without selling our souls. This isn't selling our souls, he insisted. It's a temporary compromise for a permanent solution. I looked at this man I'd loved for 5 years, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. How had the loving, supportive husband I'd married turned into someone willing to trade my dignity for money? Mark, I said quietly, if you don't tell these men to leave right now, we're done. Not just tonight, but forever. I'll pack my bags and you'll never see me again. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw the man I'd married, the man who would never have considered something like this. Okay, he said softly. Okay, I'll tell them to leave. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded and walked back to the patio door. I watched as he spoke to the three men, his back to me. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see the men's reactions. Alex looked angry, Ryan seemed disappointed, and Ben remained impassive. After a few minutes, Mark came back inside, his face pale. They're leaving, he said quietly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. But Sarah, he continued, you need to understand what this means. We're not getting the investment. The business will likely fail. We'll lose everything. I'd rather lose everything with my integrity intact than keep it by sacrificing my values, I replied. He nodded slowly. I understand. I just hope you can forgive me someday. I don't know if I can, I admitted honestly. What you asked of me tonight, it's not something I can easily forget. He looked devastated, and despite everything, a part of me felt sorry for him. He was desperate, and desperation makes people do terrible things. We'll figure it out, I said, my voice softer. But not tonight. Tonight, I just need them to leave. Mark nodded and went to see the men out. I stayed in the living room, my body trembling with adrenaline and leftover fear. I could hear muffled voices from the entryway, and then the sound of the door opening and closing. Silence. Mark came back into the living room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. They're gone, he said. I nodded, not sure what to say. The night had been emotionally exhausting, and I wasn't ready to process everything that had happened. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said, his voice breaking. I don't know what came over me. I was so desperate about the business, and I thought— You thought what? I asked when he trailed off. That I would be okay with this? That our marriage meant so little that I would sell myself for your business? No, he said quickly. I wasn't thinking at all. I was panicking, and I made a terrible mistake. A terrible mistake is forgetting to pay a bill or showing up late for a meeting, I replied. This is something else entirely. He nodded miserably. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I don't know if you can, I said honestly. How do I trust you again after this? How do I know you won't ask something like this of me again the next time you're desperate? I won't, he promised. I swear I'll never put you in this position again. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the trust that had been the foundation of our marriage had been shattered tonight, and I wasn't sure it could be repaired. I'm going to bed, I said, turning away from him. I think we should sleep in separate rooms tonight. He didn't argue, just nodded as I walked away. As I climbed the stairs to our guest bedroom, I wondered if our marriage could survive this. I wondered if I could ever look at Mark the same way again. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those three men, heard their propositions, felt Mark's desperation. I kept replaying the moments, trying to understand how we had gotten to this point. The next morning, I woke up early, unable to stay in bed any longer. I went downstairs to find Mark already in the kitchen, making coffee. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Morning, he said cautiously, as if afraid I might bolt at the sound of his voice. Morning, I replied, keeping my distance. I made coffee, he offered, gesturing to the pot. I nodded and poured myself a cup, my hands shaking slightly. We stood in awkward silence for a few minutes, the weight of last night hanging between us. Sarah, he finally said, we need to talk. I know, I replied, taking a sip of coffee, but I don't know what there is to say. There's a lot to say, he insisted, starting with how sorry I am. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. But remorse wasn't enough to fix this. You're sorry, I said slowly. But are you sorry because you realize how wrong what you did was, or are you sorry because I refused and you're not getting the investment? He looked hurt by my question. Because I realize how wrong it was. What I asked of you, it was unforgivable. Then why did you ask it? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Why would you think that was okay? Desperation makes people do terrible things, he said quietly. I was looking at losing everything we'd worked for, everything we'd dreamed of, and I panicked. So you decided to sell me? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. No, he said quickly, not consciously. It was more like a terrible idea that spiraled out of control. I mentioned it to them as a hypothetical, and they took it seriously, and then I was in too deep to back out. I shook my head. That's not an excuse, Mark. You had multiple opportunities to end it. When I first said no, when I threatened to leave you, when I said our marriage was over. At any point, you could have done the right thing. I know, he admitted, and I'll have to live with the fact that I didn't. I set down my coffee cup, my appetite gone. The thing is, Mark, I don't know how to move past this. How do I trust you again? How do I know you won't ask something like this of me again the next time you're in a tough spot? You don't, he said honestly. Not right now. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of our lives. The rest of our lives, I repeated. Mark, I'm not sure we have a rest of our lives. I'm not sure we have tomorrow. Don't say that, he pleaded. Don't give up on us. I'm not giving up on us, I clarified. I'm trying to understand if there's still an us to give up on. He looked devastated, and despite everything, a part of me wanted to comfort him. But I couldn't. Not yet. What do you need from me? He asked. Tell me what I can do to fix this. I don't know if you can fix this, I admitted. But if we're going to try, then things need to change. Starting with complete transparency about the business. No more secrets, no more desperation. Okay, he agreed quickly. Whatever you want. And counseling, I added, both individual and couples counseling. I need to understand how you could think this was okay, and you need to understand why it wasn't. He nodded. I'll call someone today. I looked at him, this man I'd loved for 5 years, and felt a wave of sadness for what we'd lost. Even if we managed to repair our marriage, we'd never get back the innocence, the complete trust we'd had before last night. I'm going to stay with my sister for a few days, I said suddenly. I need space to think. He looked like I'd slapped him. You're leaving? Just for a few days, I clarified. I need to process what happened, and I can't do that here, with you. He nodded reluctantly. I understand. Just, please come back. I'll come back, I promised. But I can't promise what I'll be like when I do. The next few days at my sister's place were a blur of tears, anger, and confusion. I replayed the events of that night over and over, trying to make sense of it all. How could the man I loved, the man who had promised to protect me, ask me to do something so degrading? My sister Lisa was incredibly supportive. She let me cry, listened to me rage, and held me when I felt like I was falling apart. I don't know what to do, I admitted on the second day, curled up on her couch with a mug of tea. Part of me wants to leave him forever, but another part remembers the good times and wonders if we can fix this. Lisa sat beside me, her expression serious. Sarah, what Mark did was beyond wrong. It was a betrayal of the worst kind. I know, I whispered. But he's been so remorseful. He's already scheduled counseling for both of us. Remorse is good, Lisa acknowledged, but it doesn't erase what he did. The question is, can you ever trust him again after this? That was the question that kept me up at night. Trust had always been the foundation of our relationship. Without it, what did we have? Did he tell you why he did it? Lisa asked gently. He said he was desperate about the business, I explained. That he wasn't thinking clearly. That's not an excuse, Lisa said firmly. Desperation doesn't give someone the right to violate their partner like that. I know, I agreed. But I also know that Mark isn't a monster. He's a good man who made a terrible, terrible mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Lisa retorted. This is something else entirely. I nodded, unable to argue with that. What Mark had done went beyond the realm of mistakes into something much darker. On the third day, Mark called. I almost didn't answer, but part of me needed to hear his voice. Sarah, he said, his voice tentative. How are you? I've been better, I replied honestly. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, he said, and I wanted to share something with you, if you're willing to listen. I hesitated, then agreed. Okay, after you left I found something, he began. Something that made me realize how twisted my thinking had become. What is it, I asked. My father's journal, he said quietly. I found it while I was cleaning out his old office. I never read it before, but something made me open it. Mark's father had died 5 years ago, shortly after we got married. He'd been a successful businessman, and Mark had always looked up to him. What did it say, I asked. A lot of things, Mark replied, but one entry in particular stood out. It was from a time when his business was struggling, before he made it big. He wrote about how tempted he was to take unethical shortcuts, how desperate he was to succeed at any cost. I listened silently, trying to understand where this was going. But then he wrote something else, Mark continued. He wrote, Success without integrity is failure. I would rather lose everything honestly than win dishonorably. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. That's beautiful. It is, Mark agreed. And it made me realize how far I'd strayed from the values my father tried to instill in me. I was so focused on succeeding, on not failing like I thought he would have, that I lost sight of what really matters. What really matters? I prompted. You, he said simply. Our marriage, our integrity, doing the right thing even when it's hard. I was willing to sacrifice all of that for money, and I can never forgive myself for that. I was quiet for a moment, processing what he'd shared. Thank you for telling me this, Mark. There's more, he said. I've decided to close the business. What? I asked, surprised. Why? Because I realized that the business itself had become toxic, he explained. It was making me into someone I didn't want to be. I was so desperate to succeed that I was willing to compromise my values, to compromise you. I don't want to be that person anymore. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was relieved that the source of this conflict would be gone, but another part worried about what this would mean for our future. What will you do instead? I asked. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'll find something that doesn't require me to sell my soul to succeed. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could come back from this. When are you coming home? He asked. Soon, I promised. I just need a little more time. Okay, he agreed. Just know that I love you, and I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. I know, I whispered, and I love you too. That's what makes this so hard. After I hung up, I sat thinking about what Mark had shared. His father's words had clearly affected him deeply, and his decision to close the business showed that he was serious about changing. But was it enough? Could I really move past what he had asked of me? I decided to stay one more night at Lisa's, using the time to really think about what I wanted. Did I want to save my marriage, or was it time to admit that some things are unforgivable? The next morning, I made my decision. I packed my bag and said goodbye to Lisa. Are you sure you're ready to go back? She asked, hugging me tightly. No, I admitted, but I'm ready to try. When I got home, Mark was waiting for me. He looked like he hadn't slept much, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Sarah, he said, his voice filled with relief. You're back. I'm back, I confirmed, setting down my bag. But things need to be different, Mark. I know, he agreed, and they will be. I've already started the process of closing the business. I nodded, appreciating that he was taking immediate action. And counseling? I've made appointments for both of us, he said. Individual sessions tomorrow and a couples session on Friday. Good, I said, relaxing slightly. That's a start. We stood in awkward silence for a moment, neither of us sure what to say next. Would you like some tea? He finally offered. I nodded, and we moved to the kitchen, falling into our familiar routine despite the tension between us. As he prepared the tea, I looked around our home, seeing it with new eyes. This was the place where our trust had been shattered, where my husband had asked me to do the unthinkable. Sarah, Mark said, breaking the silence, there's something else I need to tell you. I looked up, my heart pounding. What is it? I contacted Alex, Ryan, and Ben, he said quietly. I felt a surge of panic. Why? What did you say to them? I told them that what happened was unacceptable, he explained. I told them that I would be reporting them to the authorities if they ever contacted me or you again. I stared at him, surprised by this development. What did they say? At first they laughed, he admitted. They said I was making a mistake, that I was throwing away a great opportunity. And then? Then I told them that I had recorded our conversation, he said. That wasn't true, but they didn't know that. I told them that if they didn't back off, I would go to the police with the recording. I felt a mix of emotions, relief that he was standing up to them, concern that he had lied to them, and confusion about why he hadn't mentioned this before. Did it work? I asked. It did, he confirmed. They agreed to leave us alone, to never contact us again. And I got confirmation this morning that the investment offer has been withdrawn. I nodded slowly. Thank you for doing that, Mark. But why didn't you tell me sooner? I was ashamed, he admitted. Ashamed that I had ever gotten involved with them in the first place, and ashamed that I had to lie to get them to back off. I reached across the table and took his hand. You did what you had to do to protect us. There's no shame in that. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, I agreed gently. But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about healing. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. The counseling sessions were difficult. There were tears, anger, and painful revelations, but they were also necessary. In my individual sessions, I worked through the trauma of what had happened. I learned that my feelings were valid, that it was okay to be angry and hurt, and that healing wasn't linear. There would be good days and bad days, and that was normal. In Mark's individual sessions, he explored the desperation that had led him to make such a terrible decision. He uncovered a deep-seated fear of failure, a need to prove himself that had been driving him to take increasingly risky actions with his business. Our couple sessions were the most challenging. We had to confront the broken trust, the hurt, and the difficult question of whether our marriage could survive this. But we also had the opportunity to remember why we had fallen in love in the first place, to reconnect with the parts of our relationship that had been strong and healthy. 3 months after that terrible night, Mark and I sat in our counselor's office holding hands across the table. "How are you both feeling about where you are in your healing process?" Dr. Miller asked, her expression kind and professional. "I'm feeling hopeful," I said honestly. "There are still moments when I feel angry or hurt, but they're becoming less frequent. I'm starting to trust Mark again, slowly." Mark squeezed my hand. "I'm grateful that Sarah is willing to give me another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." Dr. Miller nodded. "Trust can be rebuilt, but it takes time and consistent effort from both partners. Mark, you've taken some important steps by closing the business and being transparent about your actions. Sarah, you've been brave in facing your trauma and being willing to work through the difficult emotions. What's next for us?" I asked. "Continued communication is key," Dr. Miller advised, "and patience with yourselves and each other. Healing isn't a destination you arrive at, it's an ongoing process." As we left the session that day, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. We still had a long way to go, but we were moving forward together. 6 months after the incident, Mark and I were sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset. He had started a new business, a small consulting firm that allowed him to use his skills without the pressure and ethical compromises of his previous venture. "I have something for you," Mark said, handing me a small box. I opened it to find a silver bracelet with a single charm, a key. "It's beautiful," I said, looking up at him. "What's the key for?" "It's symbolic," he explained. "It represents the key to my heart, which I'm giving to you completely. No more locked doors, no more secrets. Everything I am is yours." Tears welled up in my eyes as he fastened the bracelet around my wrist. "I love you, Mark." "I love you too, Sarah," he replied, kissing me gently. "More than you'll ever know." As we sat there watching the colors of the sunset paint the sky, I reflected on how far we had come. The pain of that terrible night hadn't disappeared completely, but it no longer defined us. We had faced the worst crisis of our marriage and had come out stronger, more committed, and more honest with each other. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. Healing rarely is. But we were walking it together, hand in hand, with open hearts and a renewed commitment to the love that had brought us together in the first place. And as the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, I knew that despite everything, we had found our way back to each other. We had faced the darkness and had chosen to walk back into the light together.